Hi guys, it's officially autumn, finally, and I haven't done a book haul in a while, so I thought I'd do a roundup of my summer book buying activities, or technically I think it was still spring when I bought some of the books that I'm going to show you, but the weather was definitely already summery when I bought them. Now in this video I'm only going to show you books that I haven't already talked about and hauled before, like for instance in my video about all the things that I found in little free libraries recently, or my non-fiction wrap-up in which I included a small book haul at the end of the video. Two-thirds of the books in this haul I bought used, but I also have a small stack of books that I bought new because I either couldn't find them used or they are relatively recent releases. And in general, I prefer to buy books new if the authors are still alive and making money from them, except if they are books that I don't think I'm going to like, that I'm only buying because I'm curious about them. And in this case, I have no problem buying them used. One of the books that I bought new is a very recent release. It was only released the day before yesterday as I'm filming this, and it's TJ Klune's Under the Whispering Door. And if you are able to look past this hideously conspicuous fake sticker, you will see that it has the same aesthetic as TJ Klune's previous release for The House in the Cerulean Sea. And I haven't read that one because it sounded altogether just a little bit too twee for my taste. And I was also quite unsure about this thing with one character being a 6-year-old Antichrist, because that is just a little bit too close to the central concept of good omens. But this one sounded fascinating and altogether right up my alley. I have heard TJ Klune describe this as a kind of reverse Christmas Carol, because it is about a Scrooge-like character who dies, but before passing on he goes to a kind of purgatory that in this case comes in the form of a tea house. And it is there that he confronts his life, and I think he even goes to haunt 3 people from his life. It's supposed to be quite sad and an exploration of grief and loss and, of course, introspection. But in the end, I think it's going to be quite heartwarming and uplifting, just as The House in the Cerulean Sea. The two aren't connected content-wise, but I think in terms of the feelings that they leave you with. I'm very much looking forward to this. I think I'm going to start reading it tonight. And I bought one other fantasy book new. It's Sarah Rees Brennan's In Other Lands. This is the story of a young teenaged human boy who one day stumbles into fairyland. And that is a quite exceptional thing for him to do, because in this world human beings don't normally just walk through hedges and into fairyland. And because the boy is apparently exceptional in a somewhat diffuse way, he gets recruited into boarding school in fairyland with all those magical creatures like a mermaid, and there is a kind of griffin on the back cover. And it sounds like a very commonplace YA fantasy conceit, but I've heard that it is extremely entertaining because it is maybe a bit satirical and turns a lot of tropes onto their heads. And this is the only reason why I even got interested in that, because if it were just a YA boarding school fantasy that takes itself seriously, I wouldn't have bought it at this point in my life. Next, a 2020 release, Deacon King Kong by James McBride. This book opens when an old church deacon in a housing project in Brooklyn has just gone and shot a young drug dealer. And this book is about the community's reaction to this and its ramifications. And it paints this broad picture, I think, of life in the housing project and the different kinds of people that you meet there. This got quite a bit of press last year. James McBride is a very well-known name, and it's an Oprah's book club pick, so all of that got me interested in it and made me buy it when I saw it in an actual physical bookshop one day. And then I have the massive brick that is Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry. I'm always interested in a good Western, and rumor has it that this is one of the best. I'm a bit hesitant about it though, because I'm afraid that if it isn't in itself romanticizing of the Wild West, then it might at least leave a lot of room for romanticization. And Larry McMurtry himself, I think, once said that he regretted having written this book because it enabled people to make a TV adaptation out of this that was as romanticizing as the TV adaptation apparently was and as he thought it was. I haven't watched it myself, so I have no thoughts on that, but yeah, that just makes me a little bit cautious about the book. Not more cautious than the author himself apparently was about it at the end of his life. And finally, I have two Japanese modern classics, Life for Sale by Yukio Mishima and The Master of Go by Yasunari Kawabata. Life for Sale, translated by Stephen Dodd, is the story of a man who has basically given up, has come near to suicide, and is now thinking, well, if I have given up on my life anyway, I might as well do an experiment and offer it up for sale in a newspaper. My life, that is. Offer my life up for sale and let people buy me for a day, a night, a day and a night, whatever, and let them do whatever they want to do to me or to do with me. I bought this just because it makes me curious, but I also think that it might just be, I think that the book's being entertaining hinges on the shock value that the author thought that the episodes that he narrates would have. But I also think that for me these days, they will have very, very little shock value actually, and it might be either tedious or ridiculous in the end. But we will see which one. Or maybe I'm doing the book and the author an awful injustice and it's actually quite a riveting read. We'll see. And The Master of Go, translated by Edward Seidensticker, I bought because I want to have read a Kawabata book at one point. And this is the only one that I think doesn't sound completely awful. All of his other books, it seems, are always about old men who find meaning in the contemplation of young women. And most of the time it's young women who are in some kind of relationship with them that makes it weird. For example, they are their daughters-in-law or something like that. And none of that is the case in The Master of Go, which is a novelization or bordering on narrative nonfiction of a famous a Go match. And it's between an old master and a young novice. And they are a metaphor for the tension and the conflict between the old and the new generation in Japan of its time. My first stack of used books are all crime or crime adjacent. The first one is The Big Sleep by Raymond Chandler, which is the first, in any case, the most famous of his Philip Marlowe mysteries. Philip Marlowe, a PI in Los Angeles. This was written in 1939, so at the beginning and at the heyday of the hard-boiled detective genre. I read The Maltese Falcon by Dashiell Hammett at the end of last year or the beginning of this year, and that is a very well-beloved classic of the genre, written, I think, just a couple of years earlier than this one. And I hated it. I thought it was awful, and it was badly written, but also just so awfully of its time. And although I had originally meant to follow it up with A Big Sleep, I abandoned the project immediately. But I then recently listened to an episode of A Good Read from the I'm sorry, is it the Guardian podcast or just a BBC4 podcast? I'll link it down below, but it's a podcast in which the host and two guests recommend favorite books of theirs to each other. And the way they talked about The Big Sleep, in one of the guests talked about it, just made me interested in it again and made it sound like it was actually quite ahead of its time. So I'm hoping that that was not a red herring and that it's actually the case. And then I have Liquor by Poppy Z. Brite, and believe it or not, this is a book by Poppy Z. Brite that is set in New Orleans and is not about vampires or anything paranormal for that matter. I think it isn't. I'm operating under the assumption that it isn't. This is the story of a gay couple, who are opening a restaurant in New Orleans and suddenly have to deal with the criminal underbelly of the city. This is pre-Hurricane Katrina New Orleans. The book was written just before Hurricane Katrina, I think in 2004, so it's probably going to make a contemporary reader feel quite nostalgic for that era, even if that wasn't its intention. My next book was a very interesting find. It's Goldenboy by Michael Nava, and this is the second of the original Henry Rios mysteries. Michael Nava has reworked all his Henry Rios mysteries recently, or is in the process of reworking it, because especially the first book he thought had to be rewritten, because when he originally wrote it, he didn't know that it was going to be a series, and so there are some obvious the journey is quite rough through the first couple of books. And this is the original second book, which he hasn't rewritten yet, and I don't know if he ever will. There is a new second book that came out a couple of years ago, but this one he hasn't rewritten yet, and I've always been interested in it because in this one he meets his partner of book the original books 3 and 4, now books 4 and 5, I think. In any way, he meets a young man who becomes his partner for a while, and I've always been interested in how the two of them met and got together, because he is such an important person for Henry Rios in a couple of later books. So I'm very glad I found a used copy of this one online. I'm not sure if Michael Nava, the author, likes the idea of people reading his old books or mixing the old and new ones, but that's just something that he has to live with. And then I've got Hangover Square by Patrick Hamilton, and I admit that I bought this first and foremost because of the title. Hangover Square is obviously a reference to Hanover Square in Mayfair in London, and apparently this is a darkly comic, paints a darkly comic picture of the nightlife in London in the just at the beginning of the war and in the pre-war months. And yeah, just the title alone, I think, justifies this purchase. And I think a book with a title like that just deserves to be read, whatever the contents may turn out to be. And then The Daughter of Time by Josephine Tay. And this is a detective novel of a different kind. It's about a Scotland Yard inspector who is out of action due to a broken leg. And to pass the time, he takes it upon himself to, once and for all, solve the mystery of the princes in the tower, the nephews of Richard III, who were imprisoned in the tower and died or disappeared during their imprisonment. And it was always the question whether Richard III had them killed or somebody else, and what happened to them. And this Scotland Yard inspector is now going to solve this, or not. We will see. And then I have a handful of historical novels. Painter to the King by Amy Sackville is about the life and the work of the painter Velázquez, and it is allegedly very experimental, but it doesn't immediately become obvious in what way the writing is experimental. But in any case, Velázquez and experimental writing, and I'm in. And The Birthday Boys by Beryl Bainbridge is about the Scott expedition, the disastrous Antarctica expedition, the National Geographical Society expedition that ended in death. And the book is told consecutively from 6 different perspectives of 6 of the central players. And Beryl Bainbridge has a talent for pointing out the absurd in horrific historical events, and that is what I most like about her books, and which I'm hoping I'm going to find in this book as well. And this is a German translation of the Chinese book that was translated into English under the title Red Sorghum. And it's the story of a family in rural China in the middle of the 20th century. I think it is mainly set during the Second Sino-Japanese War and during the birth of modern China. And I don't know much more about it. I was looking for Chinese modern classics, and I think, was the author awarded the Nobel Prize? I can't remember right now, but in any case, he is a decorated author, and so seemed like a good starting point. And another historical novel about China, but from deeper down into history and from a Western author, is The 10,000 Things by John Spurling, which is apparently a sweeping historical novel that deserves to be compared to the classic Chinese novels that partly inspired it. It says The 10,000 Things. Is nothing short of a literary event. Set on the cusp of the Ming Dynasty, it is a novel of fated meetings, grand battles, and riveting drama. Wang Meng is a low-level bureaucrat and also an extraordinarily gifted artist, and as he wanders through a landscape at once stunning and haunting, he discovers an empire in turmoil, which with exquisite observations and thrilling action, the 10,000 things, sorry, The 10,000, which which with exquisite observations and thrilling action, the 10,000 things brings the past to vivid, resonant life. Whew. Does anybody now actually remember a thing of what I just read? Sorry. Moving on to some modern classics. Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas by Hunter S. Thompson. I've never actually watched the movie because I think it is one that you just have to watch stoned with friends, and that just somehow has never happened. So in the meantime, the book. And another book that was inspired by a painter, The Moon and Sixpence by W. Somerset Maugham, which was inspired by Paul Gauguin. It's about one Charles Strickland who abandons his conventional life and moves to Tahiti to dedicate his life to his art. And it is apparently a satiric caricature of Edwardian Moors and a vivid portrayal of the mentality of genius. And Christopher Isherwood's Goodbye to Berlin is a portrayal and kind of a love letter to a life and time that was about to end because of the rise to power of the Nazis. It's quite episodic. It can almost be read like short stories, or can be read like short stories. And it seems to me to be a more meaningful alternative to Armistead Maupin's Tales of the City, which I did not like at all. I thought it was a load of crap. And the last of the books that I bought is Senshiro by Natsume Soseki. This is the story of a young man from the turn of the 20th century, so from the 19th to the 20th century, who moves to Tokyo for university and is quite overwhelmed with life in the big city, and has to navigate the society and the academic challenges in Tokyo. I read Natsume Soseki's Kokoro a couple of months ago and liked it a lot, so I was interested what else he had written. And I have one more book, and that is again one that I found in a little free library, or rather a large free library, because as I showed you in my little free library haul video, those things are anything but little in Germany. The book is Salman Rushdie's The Satanic Verses. And I'm so glad I found a copy of this one, because I've always been curious about it. Because how can you not be curious about a book that made the Ayatollah Khomeini issue a fatwa against the author? And I mean, that alone makes it worth reading. But I've never been quite sure if I would actually enjoy it. It's an immigrant story. It's the story of two Muslimic Indians who immigrate into England and try and succeed or fail to carve out a life for themselves there. And that's as much as I know about it, because even though it is such a famous book, you never hear much about it beyond whether or not the treatment of a handful of verses from the Quran in the book is offensive or not. It's a very long book. It's over 500 pages long, so who knows when I will succeed in making myself pick it up, but I'm glad I found it for free. So these are, I think, all the new books that I had to show you. If you have read any of them, do let me know in the comments what you thought about them, and I'll see you very soon. Bye guys!